I want to start by talking a little bit more about the movement patterning that I'm using for this, so that you'll sort of get a little bit of a context. So this whole somatic tradition has embedded within it this idea that we're working with patterning that is organic to organisms, starting from the pulsing of the first cell through to the sinuous movements of snakes and worms, and then eventually getting into four-legged animals, and then of course we use all of those basic patterns as we go up into standing. And I want to give you a little bit of a picture of what that looks like developmentally today, so that you can kind of sort of see how we're going to be using this next section that we're going to do today, which is starting to work with the twists through the body. And so when we're in utero, we know that that classic fetus positioning of the baby is that we're lying like this and turned into ourselves. And the first time that really changes is when we're born. And so we come out through the birth canal, and there's both a straightening that happens, and those of you who remember from your own birthing of children or seeing this, that there's also a twisting that happens. So there's a lengthening and twisting, which is the first experiential pattern of a baby. When we are now out into the world, the next thing that we really need to learn to do is to be able to pick up our head so that we can start to look around. And there's a basic thing that organisms do, which is that we're looking for things that then we meet with through our mouth. And so it's always kind of searching for something that we can take in. And so there's that kind of looking up and towards something and then reaching out with a hand. And it's actually one of the first basic patterns is that hand-mouth movement, which coordinates movement through the neck, and we'll get to that later on. But with that basic lifting of the head, it's the first engagement of the muscles along the spine. And as you know, sort of somewhere around 2 to 3 months is when that is able to start kicking in. But it's a very important part of kind of the awakening of moving into the world and allowing us to start to move organizational charge or energy through the body. So it's how we sort of build up energy to start moving out and engaging in the world, until eventually I'll bypass sort of an intermediary thing that only certain kinds of reptiles do, which is the belly stays on the floor and we crawl, which is one arm and one leg go together. But what we do as human beings is we very quickly bypass that and we come up onto our hands and knees, and you've probably seen that kind of thing that babies are doing of kind of rocking, which is kind of like that thrust movement starting to want to happen. And eventually it goes to the point where we can push ourselves up into the world. And we only are able to maintain that by that engagement of the spinal muscles that allows us to come into that holding of our spine up and moving into the world. So we really move from this place to this place. What happens as we move into the world is that because now we're standing, we're in a much higher stimulus environment. So we pick up more that's happening around us. It's one of the reasons, aside from just fatigue of the spinal muscles, why lying down is a more restful position, is because not only does it allow those muscles to relax, but it takes us down into a low stimulus environment, flat to the floor. Right? So once we're up and we get into high stimulus, our spinal muscles then are constantly responding to that stimulus. So the more stimulus that we're getting in the world, the more this starts to happen. And so the more constant that is, the more we get that contraction along the spine, which arches the lower back, and the other most mobile part is arches the neck. So we get this. And then when we're trying to deal with things in the world, to get that arched neck muscles to deal with things, we start bringing our head forward. That's the head forward posture. We're looking into screens, for example, high stimulus, but we have to kind of get ourselves forward. some arching in the back, which, especially if we're sitting, the hip flexor muscles are shortened up here, so we don't even know how much they're pulling on the lower back until we go to stand up, and we start noticing as we get older that achiness, because those muscles don't know how to lengthen out and take the pull off the lower back. And with fatigue, we start to get the arching of overstimulus, but a collapse that happens from, we can't process that much energy, so our breathing shuts down, we pull in here, and we're starting to kind of get this kind of posture, which eventually is sometimes called senile posture, which is us needing to get along with walkers and canes. So, but underlying all of that reactivity to what's happening in the world is that underlying that is that basic organizational pattern that says that yes, sometimes we need to come up into the world like this and take in the fullness of it, and other times we need to go in and take it into ourselves and integrate. And so these patterns become a really important way of processing information, and we start to re-access them in yoga. We do things like cat and cow and other exercise forms. What we're focusing on in this class, especially because it's the somatics kind of contribution, is that we think not just like, how can we say, now do a cat and cow, for example, but how can we give ourselves a little bit of a listening space to hear, and how does that movement want to happen in this moment? So you'll always hear me talk about like the asking questions rather than the directing, say, well, what wants to happen here rather than do this thing. And so it allows some space to the body to find its unique path of joining with that underlying organic pattern in the world. And so once we get up on our legs, then you can't do the thing that some of these amphibians and stuff do, where they have a belly to drag on, where you do this, like as if you were oars in a boat with the same side going forward, which is what a baby does when she's creeping. But rather, if you lifted both sides, you'd fall over. So what we start doing is we lift this and the back leg, so we have what's called a contralateral movement happening. And so this goes forward and this goes forward. And this eventually becomes the human walking movement. So this leg goes forward, this hip goes back, this shoulder goes back, and we spiral around the center.